2019 U.S. Foreign Policy. President Donald Trump is floundering as much internationally as he is domestically. The United States, under his watch, arguably has less leverage with its allies than it's had at any time in modern history. Trump's foreign policies from the Middle East and North Korea to Venezuela have largely failed. Even in areas where the U.S. traditionally has had good standing, like NATO and the European Union, many now view the administration's conduct as reckless and disorganized.
The U.S. foreign policy establishment increasingly finds itself isolated in an international arena.
2019 was marked by conflicts and the U.S. constantly getting rebuked by friends and foes alike.
Trump's foreign policy can best be described as chaotic. He has done much in his 3 years in office to erode the trust of traditional U.S. allies.
Coup plot in Venezuela. In January, the Trump administration recognized Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido as the nation's interim president. The White House declared the 2018 re-election of President Maduro illegitimate.
In solidarity with the Venezuelan people and out of respect for Venezuelan democracy, the United States proudly recognized National Assembly President Juan Guaido as the interim president of Venezuela. The time for debate is done. The regime of former President Nicolas Maduro is illegitimate.
In the following months, the U.S. moved to impose sanctions on Venezuela, including an oil embargo, in an effort to oust the government. President Maduro has denounced what he calls a U.S.-inspired coup plot against his government. Trump personally called on Maduro to give up power.
You cannot hide from the choice that now confronts you. You can choose to accept President Guaido's generous offer of amnesty to live your life in peace with your families and your countrymen. President Guaido does not seek retribution against you, and neither do we.
The United States has waged an incessant, unceasing war, a hybrid war, a war in all of its iterations against the people of Venezuela. And it has not been successful. The 30 million people of Venezuela and the Venezuelan diaspora continue to push forward despite all the difficulties. What they've done to the Venezuelan Bolivar is criminal. Now, as we speak, a U.S. dollar is worth 42,000 Venezuelan Bolivares. So they've destroyed the currency of Venezuela. They've isolated and blockaded the economy of Venezuela.
Despite the Trump administration's pressure campaign, Venezuela's military stayed loyal to Maduro. The country's economy has begun to improve and Maduro remains in power. What's the true U.S. objective in Venezuela?
This internationalized war, this blockade, the media, economic, political, diplomatic blockade of Venezuela has sought since 1998 to overthrow first Chavez, and after Chavez's death in 2013, it sought to overthrow all of Chavismo, the essence of the Bolivarian revolution. But they have failed, and the Venezuelan people continue to defy the historical odds and stand up more dignified.
Trade war. Trump's foreign policy has been costly not only to the U.S. economy, but also to the world economy. Trump's trade war with China dominated headlines this year, weighing down global growth.
The U.S. and China are locked in a trade battle that is being watched and felt around the world, certainly worried about. Yesterday, the Trump administration officially named China a currency manipulator once again. Beijing denies that. It announced it is suspending all imports of U.S. agricultural products. The moves created uncertainty that sent global stock markets plunging yesterday.
A comprehensive trade deal with China has repeatedly been stalled. In May, trade talks between the two largest economies broke down, and the U.S. increased tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods from 10 to 25%.
America will never apologize for protecting
its citizens. The United States has just announced tariffs on another $200 billion in Chinese-made goods, for a total so far of $250 billion. I have great respect and affection for my friend, President Xi, but I have made clear our trade imbalance is just not acceptable.
China retaliated in kind in June, raising tariffs on $60 billion worth of U.S. goods. In the following months, the U.S. labeled China a currency manipulator and threatened to halt all private investment in the country.
The U.S. doesn't like that China is growing so fast and set to overtake America as like the biggest economy in the world.
What is the story behind the trade war?
The 21st century, according to many experts, is the Chinese century. So what we see is the crumbling of U.S. economic dominion and political domination, and this fear of a rising China. In the words of Mao Zedong in 1949, China has at last stood up. And that's the fear.
For months, Trump has been saying that China is ready to make a deal.
I think we will make a deal with China. I really think they want to. I think they sort of have to.
Beijing has stuck to its demand that a deal must start with Washington removing its punitive tariffs on Chinese products. Experts say the trade war is just a cover for countering the rise of China.
Behind all of these New York Times and CNN and Fox headlines is a fear of China, an attempt to cripple China, to demonize China, to justify through this all this propaganda about Hong Kong and Hong Kong's quote-unquote will to be free, yet at the same time we don't hear the mainstream news mention Bolivia, in Chile, in Haiti, and how many countries right now, Lebanon, rising up against neoliberalism.
After 18 months, the U.S. and China reached a Phase 1 agreement in December to start de-escalating. However, the 25% U.S. tariff on Chinese imports remains in place. Tensions with Iran. Tensions between the U.S. and Iran reached a boiling point in June after Iran shot down an American drone that had intruded into the Islamic Republic's airspace. Trump took to Twitter to say he had just ordered, but then called off a retaliatory strike on Iranian targets. The U.S. then sent a strike group to the Persian Gulf over what it alleged to be Iranian threats against U.S. forces and commercial shipping in the region. The U.S. also moved to create a maritime coalition to patrol the Persian Gulf.
We're engaging now with a number of countries to see if we can put together a coalition that would ensure freedom of navigation both in the Straits of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandab.
However, out of more than 60 countries invited to join the coalition, only a handful accepted the U.S. invitation. In September, the U.S. further tightened sanctions on Iran, targeting the country's central bank. The new bans followed attacks on Saudi oil facilities that Riyadh and Washington blamed on Iran. Tehran rejected the accusation.
We have just sanctioned the Iranian National Bank. That is their central banking system, and it's going to be at the highest level of sanctions.
Trump's Iran policy has been defined by military threats and economic sanctions. He adopted a hostile approach from day one.
Iran has done two things that the United States government and Donald Trump particularly consider unforgivable. One, it does not bow down to Israel, and it is a major threat not to Israel militarily, although it could be, but diplomatically. Iran is a powerful nation in the Middle East.
The Trump administration's so-called maximum pressure campaign against Iran has only backfired.
Today, the United States government is intensifying our maximum pressure campaign against the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Trump, who unilaterally withdrew from a historical deal with Iran in 2018, has said he wants to negotiate a better deal with Iran. However, Iran has made it clear it will not negotiate under pressure and sanctions.
We're ready to talk, but talk in terms of something that is not going to be valid only for the next 1.5 years or 5.5 years. We need to talk about something that is permanent.
The United States only wants governments that will do its bidding, that do not consider its natural resources its own, that will surrender its natural resources to the United States as it wants them. Iran will not do this. The Iranian government works for the good of its people, not for the good of the United States, and this is unforgivable in the eyes of the U.S. government. And Donald Trump, being as erratic as he is, has taken that to extremes.
For a year, Iran stayed strictly committed to the nuclear deal after the U.S. violated its terms. But Tehran has scaled back its commitments under the JCPOA as the Europeans fail to guarantee Iran's interests out of fear of U.S. sanctions. North Korea standoff. On June 20th, Trump became the first sitting U.S. president to set foot in North Korea, crossing the demilitarized zone for a brief meeting with the country's leader, Kim Jong-un. The meeting came months after a summit in Vietnam collapsed shortly after it began.
Basically, they wanted the sanctions lifted in their entirety, and we couldn't do that. They were willing to denuke a large portion of the areas that we wanted, but we couldn't give up all of the sanctions for that.
Trump, however, seemed desperate to resolve the nuclear standoff with North Korea to make up for his failures on Iran and Venezuela.
Frankly, I think we'll end up being very good friends with Chairman Kim and with North Korea, and I think they have tremendous potential. I've been telling everybody they have tremendous potential, unbelievable potential, but we're going to see. But it was about sanctions. I mean, they wanted sanctions lifted, but they weren't willing to do an area that we wanted. They were willing to give us areas, but not the ones we wanted.
Unhappy with U.S. sanctions and military drills on the peninsula, Pyongyang has resumed its weapon tests and threatened the U.S. with dire consequences if talks fail again.
North Korea has nuclear weapons, and Iran doesn't. And yet Trump has violated an agreement with Iran and is desperate for some kind of agreement with North Korea. If he could possibly ever come away from North Korea with anything like the JCPOA, it would be a major victory. But he isn't even close to doing that. He doesn't know how to do that. He likes the idea of being the first president to visit North Korea. This is he thinks this is historic, and this helps to cement his place in history as a great president, which he is always saying he's one of the greatest, if not the greatest presidents the United States has ever had.
Ukraine scandal. On September 24th, the U.S. House of Representatives launched a formal impeachment inquiry against Trump over his dealings with Ukraine. It stemmed from a phone call with the Ukrainian president in which Trump asked Vladimir Zelensky to investigate his political rival, Joe Biden, in exchange for military aid. Trump denied any wrongdoing, taking out his anger on the media.
Much of the media in this country is not just fake, it's corrupt.
However, Trump later very publicly asked another country, this time China, to investigate the Bidens.
Likewise, China should start an investigation into the Bidens, because what happened in China is just about as bad as what happened with Ukraine. So I would say that President Zelensky, if it were me, I would recommend that they start an investigation into the Bidens.
Trump was impeached by the House on December 18th over abuse of power and obstruction of Congress.
Today we took action to hold President Trump accountable for the serious and undisputed risk he poses to our free and fair elections and to the separation of powers that safeguards our liberty. A president must not be allowed to become a dictator.
So what is next for Trump? The president is awaiting a trial in the Republican-controlled Senate, where he's almost certain to be acquitted.
This whole impeachment show, it's two factions of the U.S. ruling class vying for power, for a poor person, for a worker, to put their faith in a Nancy Pelosi or a Hillary Clinton or any of these Democratic politicians. It's really a choice in this country between Tweedledee and Tweedledum, between two different wings of the same ruling class of capitalism. which would not bring any sense of relief to everyday working people.
The scandal has revealed how recklessly Trump has been leading America, both at home and abroad.
Well, the struggle here is not just to impeach Trump. Of course, he should be impeached and jailed for his racism and Islamophobia and anti-immigrant scapegoating, his misogyny. But the true challenge is to impeach the entire system, which continues to prey upon the planet and its resources.
Syria pullout. On October 6th, President Trump abruptly announced a decision to withdraw all remaining U.S. troops from northeastern Syria.
You know, Syria was supposed to be a short-term hit, just a very short-term hit, and we were supposed to be in and out. We want to bring our troops back home.
The move cleared the way for Turkey to launch an offensive against U.S. allied Kurdish forces in the region, which Ankara labels terrorists. Trump responded with sanctions on Turkey, a NATO ally, and threatened to destroy its economy.
Now, we have to remember that Trump has been supporting terrorist organizations in Syria. The U.S. government has been supporting terrorist organizations in Syria for several years now, and Trump has continued to do that. He removed some troops. There have been conflicts with the Kurds in Syria and Turkey for some time. This enabled Turkey to then launch an offensive. Now, Turkey and the United States are allies, and yet the United States then sanctioned Turkey for doing what the U.S. government knew Turkey was going to do when it removed those troops from Syria.
However, Trump later changed his mind and said some forces should stay behind to secure the oil.
We're keeping the oil. We have the oil. The oil is secure. We left troops behind only for the oil.
This is what's important to the U.S. government, the natural resources of Syria. The suffering that U.S.-sponsored terrorism in Syria has caused, the tremendous death toll, the homelessness, the refugee crisis, none of this is important to the United States. Securing the oil reserves is what's important, and that's what Trump has done.
Boosting Saudi defenses. Following a September attack on Saudi oil facilities that Riyadh blamed on Iran, Trump sent 3,000 U.S. troops, as well as fighter jet squadrons and missile defense systems to the kingdom. Tehran has denied it was behind the drone and cruise missile assaults.
In response to the kingdom's request, the President has approved the deployment of U.S. forces, which will be defensive in nature and primarily focused on air and missile defense. We will also work to accelerate the delivery of military equipment to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the UAE to enhance their ability to defend themselves.
The show of support came months after Trump vetoed bipartisan legislation that would have ended U.S. involvement in the Saudi war of aggression in Yemen. Since taking office, Trump has aligned his foreign policy closely with Saudi Arabia.
Trump has allied himself with Saudi Arabia for, I think, a couple of reasons. One is that Saudi Arabia is the major purchaser of U.S. weaponry, and so that brings in a lot of money. And Trump sees things in terms of dollars and cents, and he doesn't care where those weapons are going. He doesn't care that they're going to kill innocent Yemenis or anybody else, as long as the money flows into the United States. He's satisfied. The other reason Trump likes and allies with Saudi Arabia is because he has shown a tendency to have an affinity for dictators. It doesn't matter how cruel and oppressive they are. He sees them as strong, and that's what he wants to be, and that's what he wants to be like, and so he allies himself with them.
Death of al-Baghdadi. On October 26, Trump announced that Daesh leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was killed by U.S. forces.
Last night, the United States brought the world's #1 terrorist leader to justice. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead.
At a campaign rally, Trump boasted that al-Baghdadi was trembling and crying like a dog before his death, leaving his defense officials wondering whether the president had made up the details. The announcement felt like a much-needed victory for a beleaguered president criticized by allies and foes alike.
When he broke the news yesterday morning, Trump's entire press conference was about himself.
From the first day I came to office, and now we're getting close to 3 years, I would say, where's al-Baghdadi? I want al-Baghdadi. They'd come in, sir, we have somebody under. I said, I don't want somebody. I want al-Baghdadi. That's the one I want.
Yes, Trump was obsessed. You might say he had al-Baghdadi issues.
In his 2016 presidential campaign, Trump had accused Washington of creating and funding the Daesh terror group.
They have a bunch of dishonest people. They've created ISIS. Hillary Clinton created ISIS with Obama. Created with Obama.
Does al-Baghdadi's death, if it actually happened, matter now?
It won't have much impact because the U.S. will continue to support Daesh when it is convenient for it to do so. If Daesh is located or can be located in a country that the United States, for one reason or another, does not like the leadership, it will support that terrorist group as it supports any terrorist groups around the world fighting against the people of individual governments if the U.S. finds those governments displeasing. And those governments displease the U.S. when they don't bow to U.S. demands, when they don't surrender their natural resources, when they don't sever ties or create ties with countries as the U.S. demands.
Bolivian coup. In November, the U.S. added just another regime change to its scoreboards in Latin America. Bolivia's President Evo Morales was forced to step down following weeks of pressure and violent protests supported by the U.S. Morales, Bolivia's first indigenous president, said he was the victim of a coup d'etat orchestrated by Washington.
It's a crime to be indigenous. This is a class problem. When a president with the social movements, workers, rural workers, and the patriotic professions is in government, the police riot. The police carry out a coup.
Unsurprisingly, the Trump administration praised the coup by applauding the Bolivian military. In a statement, Trump said Morales' removal would send a strong signal to what he called the illegitimate regimes in Venezuela and Nicaragua as well. Was Morales' ouster a U.S.-orchestrated coup? What does it say about Washington's policy of regime change in Latin America?
Regime change is doublespeak or euphemism for recolonization. And in the words of Evo Morales, his true crime was being indigenous, was being anti-imperialist. The movement towards socialism, the MAS, was not pliable. It was not able to be controlled by Washington. So now they have Áñez and Camacho, and they have their lackeys, they have their puppets, their robots in power in La Paz. And of course, this is what they want to do in Managua. This is what they want to do in Caracas. This is what they want to do in Buenos Aires with the fall of Macri.
U.S. foreign policy under Trump doesn't appear to have a sound logic. It's erratic and based on personal whims and interests. The disaster, as many call it, has been a long time in the making, and it will last beyond Donald Trump.